Pirate Nation, welcome to a brand new Seton Hall basketball podcast. This is Hoist the Colors. I'm Tim Best. For most of you in the Seton Hall fan base and just a Big East fan base in general, you will know me as Timmy Ice, at the real Timmy Ice on social media. Seton Hall alum, class of 2018. And you got the best of both worlds. You have a younger alumnus, and for the old school perspective and provide more historical analysis. My co-host, who great writer for the Big East blog, I've had him on my show, The Igloo, plenty of times. It is Patrick Madden, and I hope you're really going to enjoy this journey that you'll be going on with us, starting with this episode throughout this season and beyond. And it's going to be, no pun intended, it's going to be a tremendous voyage. And Patrick, hope you're as excited as I am about getting started with this.
Yeah, this is I'm class of 1995, by the way. We've needed something like this for years, particularly because there are a lot of very great podcasts out there that cover specific Big East teams. There are like four of them that do St. John's, for crying out loud. Yeah. And I think a couple of people have tried to do Seton Hall stuff in the past, but I think the combination of our experiences, I'm hoping that people out there who get a listen will get some excitement out of what Tim and I, and we're going to try to get some really great guests. We'll try to get some people who we have talked to in the past, who know a lot about our opponents, maybe some people who know about our players. So I'm excited to see where this goes from here.
And not to mention, I know that there have been a couple podcasts. So I know Chris Pace has had one that was kind of short-lived. I worked with him when I was at WSOU. He was around like my first year or two at Seton Hall. Matt Laughlin, Seton Hall alum and radio voice of the Devils. He had his own. And then, of course, Left Coast Pirates closed up shop at the end of this past season. So it's kind of what we're here for, to try to, fill a little bit of a void and give y'all something new. So on this debut episode, a lot of ground to cover because it was an eventful offseason while also in vain being an uneventful offseason. A lot of roster turnover, which I know in this day and age with the portal and NIL, it's not as uncommon anymore, but you lose some important players. Casey Ndefo graduated. Tyree Samuel transfers to Florida. Femi Odukali transfers out. Tay Davis. I feel like I haven't even touched on all of the guys who are no longer on the team, but you still bring back important players. Kadari Richmond, Alamir Dawes. And then you bring in a guy like Dylan Adewusu, a guy that Seton Hall fans were very familiar with over the last 3 years, playing across the GW with St. John's, and at times putting up some pretty good numbers, but now he's in Pirate Blue. So, Pat, what do you make of this roster, and, what do you see the potential being?
Well, I remember Coach Holloway did an interview with Brian D. Novellis for his blog, the Tri-State podcast blog. And he made the comment that blew up a little bit, where he thought that Richmond and Dawes from the neck down was the best backcourt in the Big East. Now, I think that's probably a statement that might be a little bit of a stretch. On the other hand, I think that Richmond and Dawes get slept on a lot. They both average double figures. They both shoot the ball extremely well. Now, Dawes is very streaky. There are games where Dawes can hit 5 or 6 in a row and put up 20, 25 points. And then there are games he goes 1 for 7 and only puts up about, 4 to 6 points. Richmond's 3-point shooting was a revelation last season. And I think that's something where hopefully, if he's healthy this season, he'll lean into that more. And then you've got 2 more guys who are also reliable scorers who will probably be in that starting lineup.
Yep.
Dre Davis, the transfer from Louisville, who was amongst their leading scorers last season, even though he came off the bench and even though he had injuries in late July and early February. And then you mentioned Adewusu, who was arguably one of the best players on St. John's and one of the best players that nobody in the Big East paid attention to, because all he did was he put his nose to the grindstone. He busted his butt game in and game out. He did anything that Mike Anderson asked him to do. You want to guard a power forward? Go ahead. You want to get me some rebounds? Go ahead. You want to hit a couple of threes? Go ahead. And I think that was something that was vastly underappreciated by St. John's fans, fans of the Big East in general. And as Holloway even said, I think at that interview with Brian, he said that Dylan Adewusu is his type of player, just a hard nose, work hard at practice every day, make his teammates better, and that's something which is gonna, I think, make this lineup maybe even a little bit better than the lineup we saw last season.
And here's the thing, I obviously, looking around the rest of the Big East, it's very difficult to find, I'm trying to find the right words here, to find a lot of justification in saying that Richmond and Dawes is the best backcourt in the Big East, because let's be real, Tyler Kolek and Cam Jones probably first and foremost have the biggest say, like, to disagree with that. And I would agree that Marquette possesses the best backcourt in the conference as we speak, with reigning Big East Player of the Year, Tyler Kolek, and of course Cam Jones. But I mean, let's not gloss over the fact that when Kadari Richmond was healthy, I mean, excuse me, the numbers he was putting up, legit all Big East caliber. He was a Swiss Army knife who, by the way, his mid-range game vastly improved. The three-point shooting, I think the big reason why it improved as much as it did was because his shot selection from that range vastly improved. He wasn't just chucking them up willy-nilly and on a whim. Like, he was taking very calculated three-point shots and taking risks when they were necessary, because he knew where his spots were on the court to take threes. I think his highest percentages were right around the wing. That was his bread and butter for where he was taking his threes. But so what was great about that, when he was knocking down his threes, that made the defense come up to him, and with his speed and his ability to drive to the rim and not only finish himself but find his teammates, that made him a major problem. So as a Seton Hall fan, you can only hope that Kadari is going to stay healthy, because as it stands right now, don't get me wrong, love what Al brings to the table. Kadari Richmond's the best player on this team all around, easily.
Without a doubt. And I think that's why when Holloway talks about the team, and he's always reserved in his praise for Kadari Richmond, it's because he knows Richmond can be that much better than what we've seen, that much better than what, he shows in practice, he shows in games. He made Richmond one of his three captains this season, along with Dawes and along with Dre Davis. So he's putting a lot of responsibilities on Richmond's shoulders. But Richmond's got the talent to back it up. It's not like he's putting a guy out there who, all right, you know what? He can be a decent point guard. He can sort of be our leader, so on and so forth. This is a guy who, if he puts all the pieces together, gets into a conversation for the pros, gets into the conversation for a spot in the G League. I mean, that's the potential that he's got if he can show it. I mean, you get a 6'6" guy who can play the point. He's got the ability to defend, point guards of any size. You get 3-point shooting in the 40% range, no one's going to turn that down. And he gets his first step that can attack the basket. He's got all the tools. The problem was, again, as Holloway said, from the neck down, he's an all Big East or second team all Big East player. It's the neck up where he's got to get the attitude, and he's got to shake off bad plays. Sometimes he makes bad plays, and Richmond gets into a funk once in a while. But he's just got to sort of shake that off and get ready for the next play or get ready for the next game. And he was showing strides in that direction last season until, unfortunately, he went down with that injury in the second game up in Connecticut in mid-February.
And again, I watched Kadari not up close and personal because the year he was at Syracuse, it was the year in which fans couldn't come into the dome to watch him play. But he was a better point guard there than Joe Girard was. No disrespect to JG3, but let's be real. Kadari, A, is a more talented player, and B, he's a lot more dynamic. Yeah, Joe can shoot the lights out. Okay, great. But the better floor general, better defender, clearly it's Kadari, and Boeheim overlooked him. And I mean, I'm not going to say karma played a role into the lack of success up in Syracuse the last 2 years, but I'm not. I don't think it's a coincidence. Let's be real. But I'm telling you, like that Kadari Al backcourt, it's criminally underrated, at least in my eyes, because the big thing with Al, first and foremost, the streakiness, he's got to find that consistency because with how he can shoot the rock, you need him to be more on than not. And I mean, that goes without saying, but you can't have him go like 6 for 9 from three and have a spell where like he hits like 3 threes in a row, gets on a 9-0 run by himself, forces a timeout. Like you're going to need him to score inside too, because if his 3-point shot's not working, something else has to work, or he's going to have to run the offense in stretches where Kadari's not going to be on the court, whether it be for fatigue reasons and God forbid health reasons. But with Kadari, again, there's so much potential with this kid, and Shaw he did a great job of like getting him out of his shell, and not just with being timid and not as outspoken, which I feel like he's definitely coming out of his shell that way, as we've seen with the Kooks Corner segments. But in terms of his lazy, he kind of got lazy in his first year, but when he turns it on, he's an all Big East caliber talent at point guard, and even just being a combo guard in general. But it's now that he's a senior, he's now being heavily relied upon as a captain to be a leader on this team. You can't have your leader slacking and being lazy. He's got to bring it game in and game out. Given his history, it's a tall task to ask of a guy like Kadari, but if there's anyone who can, it's him. But now the question becomes the supplementary help. Al's going to be a big help for him in the backcourt. Obviously, the team doesn't revolve around Kadari. Dre Davis is going to be very important. I mean, look at the game he had against Providence in the last regular season game. But my X factor, and I like to put an icebreaker for what can potentially take Seton Hall out of like that bottom 3 level that everyone has him at. I'm telling you, it's got to be his time. If he doesn't take that next step, his team might be in trouble. Jaquan Sanders.
Yeah, Sanders, Holloway talked about Sanders not being in peak physical condition. He's a freshman. Maybe he had some injury issues, couldn't get himself adjusted to college. But again, he's someone who, when he was a high school player in New York City, interestingly enough, playing with Dylan Adewusu and Posh Alexander now at Butler, he showed a potential to be a lights-out shooter, which, again, given where he's going to play in the rotation this season, Holloway's going to want to have that weapon coming off of his bench, but he's also going to want Sanders to do some other things that he didn't really show a lot of last year. He's going to want Sanders to step up and play some defense, which Sanders looked like he was lost on the court playing defense in the small stretches that he played. So if he's going to come in and spell Dre Davis or Dawes or Wusu, he's going to have to, for whatever minutes he gets on the court, he's going to have to show he can defend somebody. But I do think, given what he showed last season, had his breakout game, so to speak, against Xavier, even though Seton Hall got blown out in that game, he had 11 points. He was maybe the only shining star for Seton Hall in the court that night. And I think he's going to get his chances this season. And I think he's got to, if he can show that he can be more than just a spot-up shooter, I think Sanders is the type of guy you can build on, you can build your bench around, and he's someone a lot of people talk about, well, is Seton Hall going to score enough points to be able to win games? We know they can we know they'll be able to defend people, but will they be able to score enough points in order to turn some of those L's from last season into wins? And if Sanders is playing into the potential that he had when he was a high school star in New York City, then I think he's someone who can turn some of those L's into W if he can, give you a spark off the bench.
And I think that leads to like a decent discussion. But from what I can tell, what your scouting report was on Jaquan, I think you and I are probably in agreement that even though he's a rising sophomore, I think he's better suited with his skill set and what he brings to the table. I think he's better coming off the bench than he would as a starter, with him being a spark plug in a microwave, a la, and I know that this is before my time. I know, you're probably growing up with this, but Vinnie Johnson.
Yep. Absolutely. I mean, but again, he can grow into a role that an Alamir Dawes has played last season and probably this season, where you become a volume scorer. You become someone who you can trust on for 12 to 15 points a game. Now, maybe not this season, but you show some of that potential now. And when Dawes leaves after this season, if Sanders can get the rest of his game to a point where Shaheen Holloway has confidence that he's got a diverse game, he can slot him in. He can slot him in to replace Dawes. Again, you talked a couple of minutes ago about what if Dawes starts a game 1 for 6 from 3. Maybe then you bring Sanders in to fill that gap that's being left by the fact that your starting shooting guard doesn't have a shot that night. And if you can bring someone in who can hit a few shots and sort of, even the ship out a little bit, so to speak, then, you can keep the ball rolling.
So I think so I definitely want to talk about the question marks on this roster, because you lose 3 starters in terms of like the normal starting 5 last year was Kadari, Al, Odukali, Samuel, and Nadefo. 3 of them are gone. 1 via graduation, 2 transferred. What do you think the biggest hole left from last year's team was, and why? I mean, I'm going to have my theories, but with 2 of them specifically, I'm talking about Nadefo and Odukali. Those are 2 guys with that bulldog mentality that it really improved over the course of the season, especially Odukali. Like, his scoring just went up leaps and bounds towards the end of the year, where like guy had no 3-point shot. His free throw shooting was also not great, especially for a guard. And then out of nowhere, he's averaging double figures over the last 5 games or whatever it was. And with the Defo, I mean, undersized big who just protected the paint so well and was the hero in that win over the eventual national champion UConn Huskies in Newark. But so what are your takes on, the biggest question mark with the roster and the biggest hole to fill from those absences?
I think Seton Hall, if I'm worried about one thing more than anything other, it's who's going to be in the paint. Mm-hmm. Is it a lot of Hutchins Everett, the transfer from Austin Peay? Is it Jaden Badeko, the transfer from Santa Clara? Is it somebody else? Again, you look at the numbers from Everett and you look at the numbers from Badeko. And the good news is that they're more traditional centers than Tyree Samuel was. Tyree Samuel was a stretch power forward who Holloway was forced to make a center because he had no size on that team last season. This year, Everett is 6'11", and Badeko, I think, is 6'10". So, and then another guy who we didn't mention is a guy from Boise State. I think his name is Sanandre Nenega. I don't know his name.
Yeah.
What's I think it's nobody can figure.
Yeah, I know. I'm looking at the roster right now. I mean, for someone who is supposed to like, know pronunciations as a pro PA announcer, um, I mean, let's just go by Sidrake. I mean, he's
Yeah.
6'10 sophomore from Angola. Yeah, you need more height and more of an interior presence. I can definitely see him and Bediako, essentially, rotating and like rotating minutes. Not really sure what the split's going to be at the 5 between those two guys. Like kind of like a between like a 60-40 and a 70-30, depending on
Well, Everett's going to get his minutes too. I think
right.
Everett's the guy, to be honest, who Holloway likes the most out of those three.
Well, yeah, and
First of all,
he's even taller. He's 6'11.
he's a junior. Uh, Holloway has talked a lot about the fact he's got an inside-outside component to his game. He can hit the outside shot. At the same time, he showed some decent rebounding numbers at Austin Peay. That the issue is, how does your game translate from Austin Peay to the Big East? He could look halfway decent in the Ohio Valley Conference, but it's a big step from being a starting center in the Ohio Valley Conference to being a guy you're expecting 15, 20, even maybe 25 minutes from in the Big East. And, Everett seems to be a guy. Everett was the first guy of the bigs that Holloway recruited off the transfer portal. So in that sense, he's put a lot of his chips. Badeka was a backup center at Santa Clara. I think he's a graduate, so he's there sort of to help Everett out. Sandrick is sort of a project. He's only a sophomore. He had a lot of injuries up in Boise, but I believe he was a top 100 prospect, 4-star guy when he got to Boise State. So if you can get him healthy and you can get him playing to his potential, he's someone you can build upon to make a very solid front court. I don't know how much, Holloway trusts that he's going to be able to go. But again, that's something where if you get 3 guys who can play center instead of last year where you basically had at best 1.5, depending on your view of what Trey Jackson brought to the table last season. Particularly, you need that in the Big East because you're going against Kalkbrenner. You're going against Klingon. You're going against Eric Dixon of Villanova. You're going against Soriano of St. John's. There are so many really good big guys that you got to have somebody who can contain them if you're going to win the lion's share of conference games this season.
I mean, you got that right. And, for the first time in what seems like a long time, I would say probably since maybe around the time of the death of the old Big East. So we're talking like 10 years. This might be the first time we see Seton Hall bottom 3 in the preseason poll. Actually, now that I think about it, 2019, the year after my graduating senior class of Dino, Ish, Desi, and Angel, they were picked to finish 8th out of 10. And they ended up finishing in that 4-way tie for 3rd. They got the 3 seed. So, I mean, if there's any, trying to think about the word, if there's anything to, find some solace in, I mean, look what happened when they were picked to finish bottom 3 in 2019. And I mean, at least there were like some expectations because at least you had a guy like Miles Powell. But this time around, I mean, yeah, sure, you got Kadari, but with how they kind of like, they didn't strike out with the portal, but compared to other schools, they're like down way below where some of these other schools got with, UConn getting Cam Spencer and Creighton getting Ashworth from Utah State. Obviously, Posh Alexander now at Butler. Villanova got TJ Bamba from Washington State. A lot of these schools got big time transfers. I mean, St. John's got Jordan Dingle, who was one of the top 10 transfer prospects out there coming over from Penn. Yeah, obviously, like Seton Hall, I don't want to say they struck out, but compared to these other schools, they kind of got like slim pickings, and nowhere near the kind of crop that a lot of these schools got. And obviously, as Seton Hall fans, you're worried that it's gonna come back to bite them.
Yeah, you know what? I sort of take a different view of that. You, I think for better or for worse, these are Shaheen Holloway's guys.
Right.
There are certain transfers who might not want to play for Shaheen Holloway because he will insist that you play defense. He will insist that you play within the team concept. I mean, you look at the same. I mean, I hate to fall back on the St. Peter's thing, but honestly, he might have had one guy who was a star in that team, and that was Daryl Banks. I think Daryl Banks the third, the shooting guard, who I think was averaging almost 15 points a game. Other than that, he had a bunch of just, if you want to say, yeah, he was relying upon a team of role players who just played way above their level when they made that NCAA tournament run. But I think, and there's a lot of parallels to Kevin Willard. I mean, besides maybe Whitehead and maybe Delgado, the rest of those guys were guys who were trying. Willard's goal was to develop them into the system. Even Miles Powell. Powell was a 4-star guy when he came out of South Kent down in Delaware, I think, or Connecticut, wherever he was coming from.
And he
But,
weighed 240 pounds too.
You look at the pictures of the guy, you're like, this guy's going to be an all Big East Player of the Year candidate, looking the way he did. And yet look at what happened when he put the work in. So you're going to have to see a lot of that. You're going to have to see a lot of guys, sort of play above their weight, so to speak, or play above their level. But I mean, I think that's part of where, this is why you had Shaheen Holloway set up as the successor to Kevin Willard. This is why you got him when Willard went to Maryland, because if you look at the history of Seton Hall basketball in the last 10 years, as much as people mock this idea, Seton Hall turns 2-star guys into 4-star guys. There's guys who should be 5-point-a-game guys on a roster and makes them 10-point-a-game guys. So really it's a matter of you got to take whatever talent you got and you got to bring it to a level which is just going to surprise people. This is going to be a sum. If this team is successful, it's going to be a sum that's better than the parts. You look at you look at these guys. Even look at the centers: Badeko, Everett, Nanaga. You look at people like David Tubeck, the freshman who we got from Memphis. Early in the transfer period, Isaiah Coleman, the guy we got from Charleston. These are guys who are going to have to play up to the level that we expect, and then that much more if Seton Hall is going to be successful. But that's why you trust Shaheen Holloway, or that's why you have to try to trust Shaheen Holloway, because look at the players he's been able to do that, as an assistant at Seton Hall, and then when he was the head coach at St. Peter's. You look at the track. A guy like Kadeem Carrington, for example, we've talked about, who, a lot of people didn't think Carrington had business being a big-time player in the Big East, yet look, when he graduated, he was probably the second best player on that 2018 team, just because he took whatever he had, and then the coaching staff built such a way to win in a guy like that. And you hope to see that in guy. I mean, I think Trey Davis has that already. I think Alamir Dawes has that already. Will we see that in Richmond? Will we see that in a guy like Badeko? Will we see that in Sanders? That's what you have to look for to be the difference between a Seton Hall team that was 17-16 and barely made the NIT to a team you're hoping might get closer to 19 or 20 wins and find their way into the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, which, I mean, if based on early preseason power rankings, I mean, again, just based on that, it's a lot to ask for. But I feel like internally, like, they believe within themselves that they're more than capable of doing that, which I love. But I mean, I definitely need to address this though, regarding the bringing in talent and having resources now, because of, you can't ignore the elephant in the room, what NIL is capable of to bringing in certain talent. I'm not saying like you got to shell out, like $250,000 deals to bring in a transfer, because that's just ridiculous. But this is going to take time because Seton Hall's NIL budget is among the lowest in the Big East. I think Butler's the lowest if statistics show correctly. But if we're looking ahead a little bit, they broke ground on the new practice facility, which it's going to take some time, but having a new practice facility is going to be instrumental to luring in more recruits if the NIL doesn't play as much of a factor in someone's decision, whether it be recruiting a freshman out of high school or trying to bring in a transfer. So that's going to be important. The obviously artist renderings are going to make that place look great. It's a matter of, how they put it all together, which I got more than enough faith in doing because, I mean, have you seen some of the renovations that have happened on Seton Hall's campus? Look at the new youth center, for crying out loud. When I went there in April, I'm like, what the hell is this place? It's almost unrecognizable, but in the best way possible. It's like pristine, especially the new Welcome Center too, which actually opened my senior year of college.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's. I think you put some pieces. I mean, the NIL issue. If I look back, a lot of fans from 20, 30 years ago talk about, the prospects. A lot of people joke now about we make the top 5 list of these elite 4 and 5 star guys. We make the top 4 or 5 list for these top 100 guys, but this was happening before NIL.
Yeah.
Was there payments under the table we couldn't make to certain prospects that schools like Kentucky and Duke and North Carolina and maybe even a Villanova could make that we couldn't make? Probably. We'll never know. But, now that it's legal, where we stand in the arms race. Connecticut's going to be a juggernaut. No question about it. They have ridiculous, and they have all the enthusiasm, of course, because they just won the national championship.
Yeah, and they're also a state school.
Yeah, they have the biggest fan base in the conference as well. Villanova's living off of what happened the last 10 years. 2 national championships doesn't hurt. Jay Wright can still make calls to people who he'd like to see, give some money into their NIL program, and they'll deliver. And then, unfortunately, as much as we hate to say it, St. John's with Rick Pitino is just going to be you see some of the events they've already done, and Pitino hasn't even coached one game yet. So, and unfortunately, I think Seton Hall is always going to be, unfortunately, we're always going to be that way because we're not the biggest school in the conference. We don't have the biggest financial endowment in the conference. But I think we've always been the little engine that can find its way. Even with all of these barriers, Kevin Willard made, 5 NCAA tournaments his last 6 seasons at Seton Hall. We won the Big East championship in 2016. We made Elite Eights and Sweet 16s all the way back in the late 80s and early 90s. So I think that in that sense, Seton Hall can, if things fall into place, we can be up there with almost anybody in the Big East with the combination of, if Holloway can tap into what he showed a little bit at St. Peter's, I think we get enough talent to compete. I mean, look, we beat Connecticut last season. We still ended up beating the team that would go on and win the national championship. So in that sense, it's like, okay, but I mean, you say, hey, that's a one-shot wonder, but, other teams that you and I have followed over the years have managed to find their way to get just enough Big East wins to sneak into the NCAA tournament. And now we live in an era in the NCAA tournament where, almost anybody from a 12 seed on up can make a Final Four run. Florida Atlantic, for crying out loud, gets a 9 seed and makes it to the Final Four. There was no Final Four team last year who was seeded above the 4 line in the tournament. So when these are places Seton Hall can then end up in, and then you hit the right luck in an NCAA tournament, and you're in an Elite Eight, you're in a Final Four, stuff like that. There's no reason we can't be on a level with the Creightons and the Marquettes and the Xaviers and even the St. John's of the Big East, with even our limitations in NIL.
Yeah, because it's kind of. I mean, think about Moneyball. I know that in the end, the A's never amounted to win anything substantial. I think they've won. I think in this century they've won maybe 2 playoff series total. And one of them was during the COVID season in 2020. But I mean, the point kind of remains here. I'm not like with the whole NIL thing. I mean, there are schools that can buy rosters, basically. I mean, I remember during the genesis of the whole NIL thing, like Nick Saban was, he was going at Jimbo Fisher, like he bought his roster with NIL money. I was like, yeah, like it's true. I mean, there's parts that are probably not true, but yeah, you could buy a roster with NIL, and there are some schools. I mean, Texas A&M apparently their endowments in 9 figures, like borderline, like closer to 10 figures than it is to 9, like where it's like over $500 million. Like that's the kind of industry that we're in right now. But you also got to consider. I mean, you talk about Cinderella teams making the Final Four. No, the highest best seed making the Final Four last year was UConn, and they were a 4. But you think about all the other things that happened, specifically with New Jersey teams. 15th seed Princeton gets to the Sweet 16 before they fall to Creighton. FDU becoming the second 16 seed to ever upset a 1 before they lost to Florida Atlantic, who made the Final Four. And granted, they got killed towards the end, but still, I mean, you look around the state of New Jersey, if you're Seton Hall, like if Princeton and FDU can do these things, even with some of our limitations compared to our Big East counterparts, that we shouldn't be looking at that like, damn, like we can't hang, because even with that, Princeton and FDU and obviously St. Peter's under Shaw in 2022, they were still able to achieve great things. So I think our message, and I know, Pat, I know you're probably going to convey this too. If you're the Seton Hall fan base, I know like we're behind the 8 ball quite a bit with NIL, but like take a chill pill, y'all. Just relax. And I'm a big believer in Shaw's plan, as JP Carlissimo touted it. Like, just let the plan take its course. Just be patient.
Right. And I think that if people look at what these guys don't look at what the guys can't do. Look at what these guys can do, or what they have potential. I mean, even last year, nobody expected much from Tyrese Samuel when they made him out to play the starting center position. Yeah, look at the type of games. I mean, he dominated Manny Bates from Butler, who was a top 100 prospect, tremendous skill as a rebounder, as an interior player. Look at the fact that we beat Joel Soriano twice last season. So, look at all that stuff in place. And, we have the potential to, look at what these guys can do. Look at what Badeko can do. Look at what Wusu can do. Look at what Dawes can do. And if these guys do what they can do and don't try to go way above what you expect them to do, then, there's potential in the future. So, again, I think you just gotta, look, and it might not work out, but that's why you're a Seton Hall fan. I don't know how many of the more recent guys have been through some of the depths of like the George Blaney era, or some of the bad years of the Tommy Amica era, or the Bobby Gonzalez era.
There it is. I was waiting for you to mention Bobby G.
There were some really disappointing and bad Seton Hall teams. Could this team go 9th place and go 6-14 in the Big East? Absolutely. But the flip side to that is that, maybe you'll be pleasantly surprised. Maybe they will win 18, 19 games overall, go 11-9 in the Big East, and be in the discussion for the NCAA tournament at the beginning of March. I mean, a couple of wins last season, and if they beat Villanova and Creighton early in February, they were in both of those games till the end, they make the NCAA tournament. So I think this team's got the potential to be an NCAA tournament team. It's a question of whether Holloway can get the players to buy in. And I think the guys who are coming back, bought in, they stayed. And if they can get the advantages of more practice, knowing the system, they will play that much better this season. Is it good enough with the juggernauts that are in the Big East? Time will tell.
So I think with us kind of winding down on this episode, we don't want to give you too much to digest. Like that's we're going to be having longer episodes when the season's actually happening, because we're going to have a lot more to talk about with games actually being played and looking ahead to some games, especially with Big East. Like that's the best time of the year, and nothing will change my mind on that, especially when we get to Big East tournament time, especially going to Madison Square Garden. So let's kind of end this episode with some, and I'm borrowing a term from WSOU with their Sunday night shows, Pirate Primetime, and From the Stands, called Last Licks, to end this episode. So so I guess I'll take the lead on this, and Pat, you'll let you have the floor once I get mine out of the way. So my last lick, I want to talk about Dylan Adewusu. I know that we talked a lot about a lot of guys, and Pat brought up a great point earlier in the episode about how he was one of the most underrated players in the entire Big East last year, because he was with a St. John's team that underperformed, even with a talent like Joel Soriano, still finishing 7-13 in the Big East, didn't even make the NIT. And Mike Anderson was fired at the end of the year, and Rick Pitino comes in and basically cleans house with an entirely new roster, except for maybe a couple players. And Adewusu was one of those guys that, ended up leaving St. John's for Seton Hall in this case, staying within the Big East. Now, what I'm going to say about Dylan Adewusu is that Pat's 100% right. He was severely underappreciated, underrated, even by his own fans at St. John's. You think about their last game last year, Big East quarterfinals against the eventual tournament champion in the Big East, not the national champion, and the regular season champion, Marquette, who they took down to the wire in Milwaukee 5 days before that, in a barn burner of a game that really they had no business being in towards the final seconds of the game. And ironically enough, it was Dylan Adewusu who even made it a game in that senior day game in Milwaukee with a ridiculous 4-point play. And he also, in terms of being forgotten about and underappreciated, his layup forced overtime against Marquette. Granted, I know St. John's kind of let that game slip away, and Marquette fought their way back into the game and won. And St. John's, they shot themselves in the foot too, because I think they didn't have a single field goal in that overtime period. They got all their points from the free throw line. But, when Marquette made their rally, St. John's needed a bucket to force overtime. And it wasn't Soriano who got it. It wasn't Pasha Alexander. It was Dylan Adewusu. And he's going to take that kind of mentality being forgotten about. Like, hey, I'm the guy that forced overtime. Granted, I know we didn't win, but hey, I forced overtime in the Big East tournament against Marquette, the number 1 seed, the regular season champion, the eventual Big East tournament champion. I did that. And he's going to take that mentality and that bulldog mentality. I mean, he's a bruiser, 6'4", 225. He's going to truck some dudes down low as a guard. And I'm telling you, with bringing that to the table, and if he improves his three-point shot, which he gradually did, and I know that he constantly got hounded as his true Achilles heel as a player, if he gradually improves like he has at St. John's, but makes enough of a big leap where he continues his bruiser style of play as a 2 guard, getting to the basket, scoring, and getting to the line, getting points there, and also improving his free throw percentage. And then you add an improved 3-point shot. I'm telling you, I think Dylan Adewusu should get some consideration, either as the most improved player in the Big East or getting an all Big East honorable mention nod, or even making all Big East. First team is obviously a that's a ridiculous expectation. But he is an all Big East caliber player. He stepped up to the occasion at St. John's, which a lot of people forgot about. But he's coming to Newark, trying to make people know his name and remember his name, not just within Seton Hall, but the entire Big East this year. And who knows, maybe he uses COVID year to run it back one more year at Seton Hall. But, I think he's going to be on a mission to make Rick Pitino regret not keeping him on, and make Shaheen Holloway look smart for taking him in under his leadership in South Orange.
Yeah, I can't do much. I would say the guy, I hit upon him briefly, Isaiah Coleman, freshman, again, borderline top 100 prospect, was committed to Charleston. I think it's surprising when you see a guy leave a school like Charleston, which was one of the better mid-majors, 30-win team. Granted, they're in a smaller conference, and the Big East is the Big East. So if somebody from the Big East wants you, then you look, maybe Charleston doesn't look quite as good. But he's someone, and I mentioned this in the blog earlier this offseason, is someone who Shaheen Holloway needs him to be a big-time player to prove that he can recruit. Now, the one thing people don't talk about this roster this season is that I believe there are 5 freshmen on this team. Between Coleman, you have David Tubeck, you have Arda Ozagan. I think I've got his name wrong. I'll get his name right, obviously. He's the big man from Turkey, who we picked up very late. Mm-hmm. Have a back Malachi Brown, the point guard, I think, coming out of Maryland. So you've got a lot of you've got a bunch of freshmen on this team who, if you can start to get something out of them now, you do 2 things. One, you build the foundation for future teams, but also then you don't need to rely upon the transfer portal as much. If you can get your talent and keep your talent and they perform for you, then you're not under the gun to need to tap into the transfer portal every year. You don't see a repeat of last season where you're like, all right, if we don't get the top 10 transfers, you might as well put us in the basement of the Big East. But if you get guys like Brown and Coleman and Tubeck and some of the other younger guys to start to show you that they can perform, then they become the foundation for your team next year or maybe the year after that. And then you're building off of your guys as opposed to building off of somebody else's guys. And that's something I'm going to be keeping track of this and focusing a lot on this season to see how Holloway develops guys he's recruiting out of high school.
Well, we're going to find all this out. Regular season starts 4 weeks from today at the time of recording. We're recording this on Columbus Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. So 4 weeks from today, we're kicking off the regular season, and it's going to be. I mean, the excitement's going to kick in the closer we get, but to kind of give a preview for what might come in a future episode, it was announced recently that Seton Hall will be playing in a charity exhibition game 19 days from now, Saturday, October 28th, at the abbreviation they call it the WEC in Newark, Seton Hall, playing NJIT, former Seton Hall assistants and both Seton Hall alumni. Shaheen Holloway going up against first-year head coach at NJIT, who was a great assistant at Seton Hall, and then for Kevin Willer's first year down in Maryland, Grant Billmeyer. So a little preview, we might get Grant on to talk some Seton, maybe a little bit of Seton Hall hoops about his career, because he graduated like 16 years ago now. It'll be 17 at the end of this coming season. Might take a trip down memory lane, but obviously you got a lot to talk about in terms of promoting this game because it's going to be a charity exhibition and it's going to go for a great cause for the Team Walker Toy Drive, led by Seton Hall great Jerry Walker. So that's a little preview ahead for what might be coming on this brand new Seton Hall podcast of ours, Hoist the Colors. So that is going to do it for our premiere episode. Pat, any last thoughts before we sign off for our premiere?
No, I think I think I'm excited about this podcast and excited about the season ahead.
Well, that is going to do it for this debut episode of Hoist the Colors. For Patrick Madden, I'm Tim Best. Make sure to follow us on social media. Patrick Madden on Twitter, and I refuse to call it X. Elon, don't come after me. It's Twitter, damn it. Don't take that away from me. Follow Pat on Twitter at the Sports JD, and follow me on Twitter at the Real Timmy Ice. And until next time, onward Setonia. Take care, y'all.